Shields up! Perimeter scans to max.
Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode Nepenthe, where Picard meets up with some old TNG friends while bad things happen on the Cube. Remember, there will be many spoilers ahead for this and other Trek series, otherwise, enjoy. It's not a 14-year flashback, but still a flashback as we see what Commodore O and Jurati finally talked about all those episodes ago. O wants Jurati to keep tabs on Picard, and after performing a mind meld to show the doom and gloom that awaits us all if the Cylons take over, gives Jurati a little pill to swallow which contains a tracking device. Back in the present day, as the Lacerina is caught in a tractor beam preventing their escape, Rizzo is interrogating Hugh regarding where Picard and Soji have escaped to. Hugh is refusing to cooperate, so in that lovely hopeful tone that modern Star Trek sets these days, has several of his ex-Borg murdered right in front of him. Hugh is devastated but still refuses to tell them when they've gone. Luckily for her though, due to the tracking device inside Jurati, Narek hops into a ship, and once he's taken off and ready, Rizzo tells her minions to release the tractor lock on the Lacerina. Now free, Rios calls Elnor, who somehow escaped capture for some magical unknown reason, to try and beam him back on board, but Elnor refuses, and having joined up with Hugh again, says he's going to stay behind and help him out if he can. So Rios reluctantly lets him stay and takes the ship to warp, with Narek soon following. Meanwhile, on the planet of Nepenthe, Picard and Soji arrive and are immediately greeted by a young girl who threatens them with a bow and arrow. Picard recognises her as Kestra though and asks if her mum and dad are about. After a suspicious appraisal of them, she starts walking them back to her home and asking Soji a bunch of questions along the way. It's here that Soji learns what she truly is when Kestra asks who her daddy was. Soji, already freaked out and traumatised by the events of the last episode, is now even more freaked out and wonders if anything is real or just made up at this point. Picard reassures her that her sister Dash was real but that he failed to save her. Soji though is just unable to deal with all this shit right now and walks off thinking that this is all just still one big mind game. Eventually they arrive at a lovely house in the middle of nowhere where Kestra's mum and dad turn out to be none other than Will Riker and Deanna Troi. After getting a very warm welcome from Troi, Picard quickly goes to see Riker, who immediately deduces that Picard is in some kind of trouble and offers him a safe haven. Troi also joins him and gives him a quick assessment of Soji's distress and trauma while also saying she can sense nothing from her, further proving her artificial nature. So after Soji gets a little bonding time with Kestra whilst being barraged with questions on her android skills, Troi reassures Picard that of course he can stay here, but expresses her fears about anything happening to Kestra since their first child Thaddeus died some time ago. So Picard reassures her that he'll stay no longer than he absolutely needs to. Later, Picard joins Riker, who's making some homemade pizza, and introduces himself to Soji, instantly recognising a very familiar head tilt, and once again Riker shows off his smarts by deducing exactly what's going on with Picard, suggesting he's a little out of his depth right now dealing with essentially a teenager. Soji meanwhile is trying out some real homegrown tomatoes, and Troi dusts off her counsellor's hat and tries to get Soji to open up about her feelings and what's happened to her. Soji explains recent events to her involving Narek before commenting how she doesn't trust anyone now, especially Picard. Picard then shows up and jokes about how they're here to torture her and she really shouldn't trust them, which makes Soji even more upset, who then barges her way past Picard. Troi gives Picard a good bollocking for his bad taste in jokes and suggests next time to let her and Riker help him by pretending that the dinner table is the ready room of the Enterprise so he can be the Jean-Luc Picard we all used to know again. Meanwhile on the Lacerina, though they've escaped the cube, Rios realises they're being followed by someone, saying that he must be good because he's keeping just out of range of the ship's scanners. You do know like he's right fucking behind you? Just how shite are your scanner? Rios tries a little pilot trickery to lose him, but after several attempts it becomes clear that their tail is tracking them somehow. Jurati though has had just about enough of all this shit and wants Rios to forget the whole mission and take her back home, clearly freaking out and acting all very oddly. Rios isn't sure how to deal with this, but luckily for him, Raffi knows just the thing and starts stuffing her full of red velvet cake, correctly deducing meanwhile that her mental distress is over the death of Maddox, though with no idea yet that Jurati murdered him. However, all that delicious cake is too much for Jurati and she pukes it all over the floor. Rios takes her to sickbay to make sure she's fine and then sits down with her to express his concerns that they're being tracked somehow given that they can't shake their tail, and suspects it might be Raffi's fault given she came with them to Free Cloud and then just as suddenly came back on board with no explanation. Even though Jurati has massive neon signs on her face saying "I'm the guilty one," Rios doesn't really pick up on it, and is then called back to the pilot seat after their tail once again manages to find them. Jurati seems to have now reached her lowest point though and decides it'll just be best if she ends it all here and now, and so injects herself with some deadly toxins, which looks like a rather unpleasant way to die. I mean, why not just vaporize yourself with a phaser? Oh, that's right, it's so the EMH can save her. Back on the Borg cube, Hugh tells Elnor they need to get back to the Queen Cell where they helped Picard and Soji escape in order to fully reclaim the cube back from the Romulans and take control. But before they can get anywhere, the ever-evil Rizzo appears and thanks Hugh for trying to organise an insurrection, violating the treaty as she's now authorised to kill him. Despite a valiant effort by Elnor to defend Hugh, Rizzo eventually manages to get a knife fatally thrown into his neck and beams away before Elnor can kill her with said knife. Hugh tells Elnor that he can still enact his plan, he just needs another ex-Borg to activate the Queen Cell and then promptly dies in his arms. Later, as he evades the numerous patrols, he finds himself a little corner to hide in where he spots a keychain, just hanging conveniently under a desk. He seems to recognise it and upon pressing it activates an SOS beacon for the Fenris Rangers. At the dinner table, Picard eventually manages to convince Soji to trust him a little, at least enough for her to reveal what Narek did to her to get the information he wanted, and tells him what she saw. Picard still doesn't know where this place may be though, so Kestra, being a smart little lass, contacts a local trader she knows who comes back with the information they need, impressing everyone. Later, Riker tells Picard he wouldn't blame him if he just decided to pack it in and go home, but Picard nonetheless thanks Riker for not trying to talk him out of his mission. Eventually, Rios' ship arrives in orbit and we say a sad farewell to the Riker family, and Picard and Soji are beamed up, heading off next to Soji's homeworld. Well, another fairly decent episode, though pretty much solely because we spend much of the time on Nepenthe with Riker and Troi whilst trying to build and gain Soji's trust, all of which was great. The rest was okay to just mediocre, with Rios, Raffi and Jurati's race to get to Picard while being pursued by Narek, and Jurati going through more self-torture and an eventual suicide attempt, whilst Rizzo, whom I still really don't want on my screen, continues to be evil, executes several X-Board, gets into a brief ninja fight with Elnor, and, oh yes, she murders Hugh too. It's quite telling really that the most enjoyment and engaged I actually feel watching this show is when old characters resurface. Seven, Hugh, Riker and Troi. Most of our new characters aren't nearly as engaging or interesting to watch by comparison for me. Anyway, let's get on with it. First off, it was absolutely wonderful to see Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis reprise their roles, particularly Frakes, who immediately settles back into his role of Riker, even giving us a classic shields up, which, okay, it's a little fanservice-y, but no more than Picard saying engage, and I'm totally okay with that. He still feels very much like the Riker we knew all those years ago. Older, wiser and more casual, sure, but also still very smart, insightful and still has a great commanding presence on screen. I like that he has such an in-depth security system, though slight nitpick here. When he says put security levels to max, he also has to tell it separately to enable anti-cloaking sensors. I mean, wouldn't that already be part of your maximum security levels? Anyway, the chemistry between Frakes and Stewart is just amazing to watch, each scene with the two of them clearly ranking as my favourite amongst the show so far, particularly at the end as they sit by the lake and chat. Picard also refers to him as Commander, except when we last saw him he was getting promoted to Captain of the USS Titan and presumably served as Captain on that ship for many years after. I would have liked to know a bit more about Riker's career after TNG, but the episode decides not to go into it here. Troi is also great here, and perhaps one of the best uses of Troi throughout all of Star Trek, who was often relegated to saying she sent something but didn't know what on TNG, being somewhat annoying and not always a good counsellor. Here though, she very much acts the part, talking to Soji while at the same time clearly with her counsellor hat on, and I like how she berates Picard for not taking Soji's current mental trauma seriously when he jokes about the torture to her. A later scene as they all sit down to dinner was also great, as Picard managed to really channel his old Captain Picard self, talking to Soji, which was on Troy's advice, as seeing it as if he's in the ready room on the Enterprise, and being the old Picard we all knew back then. Their daughter Kestra, named after Troy's sister who died at an early age, is also an unexpectedly decent addition. She's played very well, for a young actor, and believably helped to build up some trust and rapport with Soji, though she maybe hit the nostalgia nail on the head a little too much by going on about the old days on the Enterprise. Interwoven throughout the Riker family dynamic, from everything to various invented languages that Kestra speaks, the concept of home or homeworlds, to why they ended up living on Nepenthe in the first place, is a result of the death of their first child Thaddeus. This is a really nice touch and helps to make this such a believable family dynamic, though the way he died, via a silicon-based virus that only a positronic brain could cure, is far too convenient plot-wise in my opinion. It's also a believable and understandable reason why Picard chose not to involve Riker in his mission in the first place, given they already lost one child, and given the ruthless nature of the Tal Shiar, which Troi later expresses her fears about, and he's only here now out of desperation. Soji herself is finally, as I'd hoped, becoming far more of a character now instead of just a plot device, as she finally learns of her true nature. I'm so glad that she's off the cube now, a plotline which dragged for such a long time. I like how distrustful she is of everything and everyone after the mindfuck she's just been through, and much of the episode is spent rebuilding some trust for her with people who genuinely do have her best interests in mind. This is done best during her scenes with Kestra, who's utterly fascinated by her, barraging her with questions and thinking she's just awesome, and then later at the dinner, as Picard takes charge and says he's going to complete his mission no matter what. I'm actually looking forward now to seeing how she develops more as a character as a result. On the La Sirena, it's fairly serviceable. Rios, though, despite my initial interest in him, has come off as largely just there, and nothing has really been done to develop his character beyond his established backstory and that he's a good pilot. Apparently he's a little dumb though, as he questions Raffi's loyalty instead of Jurati's obviously odd behaviour. To me, Jurati is clearly not just grieving, but traumatised and tortured by what she's done that goes beyond the simple grief of losing a loved one, and her now constant attempts for her to just leave Picard and Soji to their fate and go back home. We also learn what Commodore O told her back in episode 2, and by told I mean mind melded. This would suggest that O is definitely a Vulcan, as we've never seen Romulans have this ability despite the species being very closely related, which brings me back to why the fuck is she wearing sunglasses?
You'd better protect your eyes from the glare.
My inner eyelids will protect my vision.
But that aside, it shows a doom and gloom galactic ending prophecy with AI once again wiping out all life. The exact same plot as Season 2 Discovery. Now, to be fair, there's no real context here, just a flash of images and large-scale planetary destruction, but this is the clear implication here. I'm not entirely sure if Jurati attempts to kill herself here just to stop them from being tracked, or that she just can't live with what she feels she's been forced to do, or perhaps a combination of both. The EMH is blatantly going to save her though, and it's obvious she'll be alive next episode, as it's clear this suicide attempt should be the rock bottom point where Jurati fesses up to what she's done and hopefully move back to some redemption. Raffi meanwhile was much better this episode, and frankly she's best when she's not bogged down with family problems or drinking herself into a stupor. When she's on her game, she's clearly a good and insightful officer, and also good at listening to and taking care of someone else's problems, as shown when she tries to make Jurati feel better. Though still not insightful enough to realise that Jurati is hiding something a little more sinister. The worst part of the episode was by far the stuff on the cube. Again. As I predicted last episode with a horrible feeling, Hugh did indeed get killed in this episode by Rizzo. I've already discussed why I don't like her, and she goes even more full evil here in murdering several ex-Borg in front of Hugh, before later on murdering Hugh himself, which felt like such a waste of a good character. After seeing what Hugh was doing on that cube and expressing to Picard last episode his hopes for the future of the ex-Borg, I had felt for just a moment the idealistic, optimistic and hopeful Star Trek was back. But then in this episode it's cruelly taken away from him and he is pointlessly killed. My only hope is that he may somehow be revived by Borg technology. Speaking of which, he talks of taking the cube away from the Romulans, implying that he may reactivate it somehow. It's been lurking in the back of my mind that the cube may eventually become fully functional and in turn go on a rampage, but we'll see. Anyway, the last we saw of Elnor, he was standing with Hugh preparing to fight a bunch of Romulan security guards, and then Hugh is on his own and Elnor is nowhere to be seen. How did he get away? Why did he abandon Hugh? He magically shows up after Rizzo leaves, instead of killing them all while they're all distracted, and then later on we also get this cliched, we must only fight in hand-to-hand combat bollocks. Luckily though we didn't get an extended ninja fight scene here, either because Rizzo decided Elnor would kick her ass, or because she wanted to distract him from Hugh so she could throw a knife and kill him. Later on as he evades capture, he comes across some sort of keychain which sends out an SOS to the Fenris Rangers. Why was this keychain here? Who placed it there? It's awfully convenient he just happened to come across it like this on such a massive ship. Honestly, Elnor feels very out of place in this series, as if he was tacked on because someone thought we should have a cool samurai warrior type. Most of the time he simply pops in and out when the plot requires him to do a last minute save, or just to stand there and look perplexed as to what's going on around him. Hugh's final words to Elnor as he dies was that he can still fully reactivate the cube if he can get another ex-Borg to help him, and given he just activated a Fenris SOS, this pretty much means that Seven is going to show up again, and be the one to reactivate the cube. At least this tells me that Seven isn't dead. Well, not yet anyway. So, a reasonably decent episode thanks to all the Picard, Riker, Troy interactions and trust building with Soji, but let down somewhat by the crappy stuff happening on the cube with some okay stuff on the La Sirena. With 3 episodes left and our characters now heading towards Soji's homeworld, let's see if things progress more and what other beloved characters may be killed off next time in the episode Broken Pieces. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did then please do check out my other reviews as well, and also if you haven't yet then please like, subscribe and share. Until next time, this is Jay Warden, signing off.